Good morning.
Good morning.
I would like to call to order the August 15, 2018 meeting of the Committee on Finance, Audit, and Budget. Will the Secretary call the roll, please?
Yes. Reverend Miller.
Here.
Mr. Irvine.
Here.
Ms. Alvarez-Rosales.
Here.
Mr. Peterson. Here. Mr. Youngblood.
Here.
Chairman Silva.
Here.
We have a quorum with 6 members of the committee present.
Our first order of business today is the approval of the committee minutes of July 11, 2018. May I have a motion to approve?
So move. Second.
Second, will the Secretary call the roll, please?
Yes. Reverend Miller.
Yes.
Mr. Irvine.
Yes.
Ms. Alvarez-Rosales.
Yes.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
Mr. Youngblood.
Yes.
Chairman Silva.
Abstain.
That motion is approved with 5 yes votes and 1 abstention.
Our next order of business is the finance report. Jeremy.
Good morning. I'm Jeremy Fine, your Chief Financial Officer, and I'll be reporting on June results. With regard to June revenues, we see farebox totals down to budget about $1.2 million. Again, as you may recall, in June was a very wet month, and as such, you see a lot of discretionary rides being withheld during that time period. So farebox totals were down about a little over $1 million, but fare passes continue to do well. We've seen this throughout the year, and we continue to see the 7-day pass and the 30-day pass exceeding expectations. So we're up about $500,000 for the month of June. Net for fare and pass totals, we're down about $700,000 for the month of June, again, due to the weather. For reduced fare reimbursement, we continue to see a haircut of about half on that line. So we see about $1.2 million less than expected per the budget. Non-farebox totals, as we've talked about in last month, we continue to see progress and positive momentum on our advertising revenues, but because of federal sequestration to our Build America bond program, as well as some accounting treatment, we see a negative variance to budget for the month of June. So the total revenues are down about $2.3 million, with about half of that, or more than half of that, coming from state and federal haircuts on June revenues. We continue to, again, go after scofflaws with regard to free rides, and you see that total here for the month of June. On a year-to-date basis, we see a similar trajectory on the farebox totals. Again, we saw and we expected to see people shifting from farebox pay-per-use to passes, and that's exactly what you see here with farebox totals down, but passes up. So we see, that pass total up over $3 million, so it puts our fare and pass total aggregate line almost $1 million to the positive on a year-to-date basis. So the first half of the year, we're up about $800,000 on our fare and pass totals. Reduced fare reimbursement, again, we would have expected to see about $14 million in receipts so far. We've only seen about 7, so we're again down that $7 million on the reduced fare reimbursement line. Non-farebox totals, again, we're being driven by the federal sequestration, and so that total revenue line of $7.8 million, 7.1 is due to state cuts, and about $350,000 is due to federal cuts. So about 7.5 million of the 7.8 is due to state and federal cuts. If it was not for those cuts to the revenues, we would be slightly below, but essentially flat for the first half of the year on our revenue targets. Again, average fare is essentially where we expected it to be, and free rides, we continue to make progress not only in the month of June, but throughout the year on scofflaws riding on free cards. On the expense side, we continue to make efforts to belt tighten to offset some of the drag that we see on revenues. For June, we see a drag here due to the labor, but again, if we took into account the ATU contract, we'd be essentially flat. Material, positive favorability as well as for fuel and power. And then the injuries and damages essentially flat, and security services slightly unfavorable but essentially flat. And then other expenses continue to be a big benefit to us for the month of June as well as throughout the year. About $4 million favorability. So we see total operating expenses favorable to the tune of about $1.6 million for the month of June. If you offset that against the revenues for the month of June, you still you see a slight drag, but about $700,000 unfavorability for the month of June. Again, primarily due to those state and federal cuts, as well as bad weather that we saw in the month. On a year-to-date basis, we continue to see a similar trajectory on the different line items. But for total operating expenses, we see positive favorability of about $4 million, which offsets a large share of the unfavorability on the revenue line. So on a net basis, we're down for the first half of the year about $3.8 million. So again, in terms of our overall budget, you see here of about $750 million for the first half of the year, a relatively small percentage, but again, we continue to look for ways to belt tighten on our expenses as well as grow our revenues to further minimize that as we go into the second half of the year. With regard to the three commodities that we purchase, fuel, power, and natural gas, we continue to be in a favorable conditions to continue to purchase fuel. We have about 75% purchased for 2019. We're waiting for fuel prices to ebb just a little bit more and make that final 10% purchase for 2019. We're also starting to gear up and look at 2020 purchases because the window is now open on that commodity for 2020 purchases. And we continue to work on getting a new power provider to replace Dynegy on the power side. And then natural gas, we'll continue to look to make selective purchases for 2020 and 2021. But again, we're just waiting for the right time and the right price because we have more than enough time to set those rates prior to the budget process for 2020 and 2021. So again, we're at kind of historic lows for natural gas. We're still at lows, but not at historic lows for fuel, and power pricing continues to be competitive. So we're excited to continue to lock in those three commodities.
Any questions? Go ahead.
So Jeremy, a couple of things. One,
Yes.
we're a little bit over 120 days before the end of the fiscal year. Two, we're always a couple of months behind in terms of what you're sharing with us, and then, because here we are now, August 14th, 13th, 14th.
Yes.
One, we should just assume we're not going to get the money from the state. And we are also assuming that the federal cuts will last at least through the rest of the year. So that's a given.
Mm-hmm.
And you talked about the 7.8, about 7.5 of that was due to state and federal. So we know, just kind of projecting out the rest of the year. A couple of questions. One, we're going to be able to balance the budget at the end of the year. With that, with knowing that these things are going to just play out for the next 120 days.
Yes.
And balancing the budget, saying also we're going to be able to maintain the level of service that we're currently providing today and balance the budget in light of this.
That's correct. Yes, we will continue. We have been assuming that those cuts will still be in effect through the rest of the year, as you indicated. And as such, we continue to make efforts to minimize our expenses, continue to grow our revenues, so that we can, at the end of the year, end up in a balanced position. So again, that is our target. We continue to be, on track for that. But again, it would be very helpful for the state, and the federal government, but particularly the state, because that's the predominant share, to understand the impact of that, haircut to the reduced fare reimbursement and our other line items, because it does have a material effect. I mean, it is painful. While we would continue to expect to meet our budget expectations, it is tough, and it continues to get tougher to get there with those state cuts.
Yeah, but even with the states, not only does it last the next 120 days, we actually have to live with the state budget to the end of June of 2020.
Correct. Yes.
Even when we get past this fiscal year, we still have 6 more months that we're facing these cuts at the federal level, and even at the state level.
At the state level.
But even
yes.
at the federal level, because their fiscal year is from October to October, they're not going to pass a budget in October. They're going to do continuing resolutions at least until March of next year. So even on the federal side, we can also see these cuts going into 2019, either March or June of next year.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
So I'm just saying, as we put the budget together for FY19, what we're facing today, we're going to face from January to June at the state level, and at least from January to March at the federal level.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman.
Anything special that we can do, okay, to try to get closer, okay, to balance?
So I think that we've done a great job of looking and working with the departments on particular line items, whether it's labor, materials, fuel, of different ways to continue to extract some value out of those various line items so that we see positive variance on a department by department level, so that in an aggregate basis we continue to see positive momentum. But again, contract line is another big one that we've been able to rely on, and again, trying to tighten up how we utilize various contracts, various materials, various other lines, so that we continue to see positive variance as best as we can to offset those drags that we see from those haircuts from the state and the feds.
Mr. Chairman, just a couple other points to amplify what Jeremy is talking about. One, we are monitoring very closely both our expenses but also our revenues, and particularly in terms of trying to find additional revenue sources that can support that side of the equation. To kind of put this into context, last year when we were at this point, we were facing a negative budget variance of about
It's about $18
million. So relatively speaking, we're doing much better this year than we did last year. A couple other things to keep in mind. We knew with the fare increase that we were going to see some drop in our revenues on the pay-per-use side of our equation. The monthly pass is where we expected to see good growth, and we are continuing to see that. I think it's also safe to say, while we're still working on the final numbers for July and for this part of August, we are starting to see some positive trends that I think are going to help us as we go into the latter half of the year. So there are a lot of things that we're working on to try to address this. I want to reiterate Jeremy's comment and the chairman's question. We are going to balance the budget for this year. There's not going to be a question about that. We are not going to have to cut service or raise fares or anything like that, and we are working towards presenting a budget this fall that will also do the same thing.
Is it normal that the second half is better than the first half usually?
So, again, we try to, mitigate the noise from the variance on ridership trends and take that into account in the budget, in the way that we spread the budget across the various months on an expense basis and on a revenue basis. Mm-hmm. So we do account for, kind of variance and ridership trends and whatnot through the budget. So, again, we've been slightly below, but as President Carter had indicated, we're well ahead of where we were this time last year, and that was prior to the ATU increases. So, again, we're ahead of the curve, so to speak, in historical precedent compared to last year. But again, we continue to make progress in working with the departments to cut those expenses, to grow the revenues, so that we can completely eliminate that gap that we see right now by the end of the year.
Jeremy, if I could, again, you guys, like you said, if it wasn't for the things we couldn't control, we basically would be flat. I mean, it's the things that we can't control. And every year, like you said, we didn't see the federal cuts coming. Mm-hmm. And then we didn't think, again, with the new state budget that they would cut on top of a cut. So in terms of managing through this from a management standpoint, Doval and the team, you guys are doing an incredible job. It's the things that we can't control
Yes.
that continues to cause us challenges. And until, like you said, we get through the fiscal year to state and maybe hopefully a new federal budget, we just got to try to figure out a way to manage our way through this until those things work themselves out. Because again, in both cases, we really can't control what's happening.
I just want to say that I commend you guys for doing an exceptional job with all the challenges that we face with the competition that keeps growing out there with rideshare and Divvy and whatever. Just to be at this point where we have a minimal difference from our budget is kudos to your staff from compared last year. And I see that in the presentations throughout the year that it used to be all red. Now I see a little green coming in
Yes, yes.
there, which is always a positive thing. So you guys have done an outstanding job, just to echo what the chairman says. And I just continue to challenge you guys to think of ways that we could continue to partner with some of those opportunities that are out there.
Absolutely.
So we can kind of bridge the gap, because a lot of departments from a major municipality standpoint, New York, Boston, Bay Area, they're seeing the same challenges that we face with the growing competition with rideshare. So kudos to you guys for doing the job that you are continuing to do.
Thank you. And that's a team effort, and we couldn't do it without the assistance of the departments. And again, looking at their particular budgets and line items and how we can continue to extract value.
I want to follow up with that. I think it is a team effort, and the team is doing a great job. I do want to ask the question, though, and I know we've discussed it a couple of different times, and Mr. President, maybe you can tell us a little bit, because we've talked about putting a marketing plan to really kind of help push in the areas of expanded revenue and seeing where there's some gaps that we can fill. Do we have an idea of when we're going to be, coming back to the board with something like that?
Let me talk to my staff. We have been working on some marketing campaigns and some other things, and I think what I'd like to do is put together a whole presentation that we can give to the board of what we're doing in that area and how we're trying to at least, in some ways, promote CTA and in a positive way sort of state the benefits of riding public transit over the other options that I know we're dealing with. There's also some partnerships that we're working on to respond to Director Youngblood, particularly with Divvy Bike, that we think are going to be very positive and supportive of sort of integrating the Divvy network into the CTA network. We're looking for, we're optimistic about using our app, the Venture app, to really leverage some technology that can allow us to really make some inroads into the transportation choices that customers make every day, and make sure that CJ is a part of that conversation, because I believe that that's really where you start to have the battle between ridership decisions. And if we're not a part of the conversation when an individual is deciding how they want to get somewhere, then that means we're going to be losing out on that ridership opportunity. So there's a lot of work that I believe we can do and we are working on around our app and technology that I think is going to help support that effort.
And obviously, it's getting done because we're seeing some changes. It just would be great to see it all in one
Yep.
place. I want to mention when we're talking about gaps, because if we can fill some of those gaps. So I had an interesting experience on Saturday. I went to the Beyonce and Jay-Z concert, which was great. It was great. It was packed.
But a lot of traffic.
Well, a lot of traffic, but I've got to tell you that there was no way to get from the concert, where there was public transportation over to the CTA line. People who were trying to get Ubers could not get them. And that's like a gap, that maybe we could form a relationship with those that are doing those types of concerts. And it's interesting because from a marketing point of view, not only from us, but from the city and from those that did the concert, I heard so many people that were saying, I'm never going to do this again. I can't walk. I got a call, so comfortable shoes, so I got the memo, but a lot of people didn't. And that might be a gap that we could fill that I think if we would have had, buses going around, I can tell you they would have been filled. So those are opportunities, I think, for us, and that's why I'm asking the question, because I know we're giving that a lot of thought, and if we could know a little bit more about what those plans are, that'd be helpful.
Absolutely, and to that point, I have been in conversations with the city about trying to create better and easier access for CTA to special events and concerts, like the one that you're talking about. I agree 100% with what you're saying. There's an opportunity there, but it requires the prioritization of public transit into the venue to allow that to work. And I can tell you that we have been talking to the city about that. We are going to continue those conversations to see if there are ways that we can improve the CTA service to those types of venues, not unlike what we do for, say, the Bears game, where we do have a dedicated, access directly into Soldiers Field that allows us to provide that service. I think that there is a great demand for that, and I think that there are opportunities for CTA in that area that I view as low-hanging fruit, really, that can really help our ridership and can really help our revenues.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If there are no further questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Our next order of business is the review of an ordinance authorizing entry into a permanent easement agreement with the City of Chicago, granting the authority an easement on certain property located at 1311-15 North Mormon Street and 1329 North Mormon Street, Chicago, Illinois Blue Line. Carol.
Good morning. I'm Carol Moore, your Chief Infrastructure Officer. So this ordinance would authorize the entry by CTA into a permanent easement agreement with the City of Chicago with respect to property located at 1311-15 North Mormon and 1329 North Mormon. So the city is in the process of conveying this property to a private owner, but it's also located adjacent to the portal of the Blue Line subway, and we need reasonable access to the property for subway maintenance. The city has agreed to provide us with the necessary easement for maintenance purposes prior to conveying the property to the private owner. So there's no cost to the easement, and CTA staff recommends acceptance from the city in order to allow for continued maintenance in this area. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Any questions, please? Any questions? If there are no further questions, may I have leave to place this item on the omnibus for approval?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next order of business is the review of an ordinance authorizing a sublease to DJM Logistics LLC of a portion of property located at 120 North Racine Avenue, Chicago, Illinois. Carol.
So this item is a consent to a sublease between Sterling Racine LLC and DJM Logistics at the CTA-owned building at 120 North Racine in Chicago. The first and second floors of this building are leased to Sterling Racine, and any sublease by Sterling Racine requires the consent of the CTA board, although the consent cannot be unreasonably withheld. So DJM is a shipping and logistics company which is doing business as MoLo. They'll lease just under 8,000 square feet for use as a corporate office. After the sublease to DJM, Sterling Racine will have about 60% of the first and second floors subleased. However, they continue to be responsible. Sterling Racine continues to be responsible for performance of all of their lease obligations, including the payment of rent and operating expenses. And DJM will be required to comply with all building rules and regulations. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Any questions? There are no further questions. May I have leave to place this item on the omnibus for approval?
So moved.
I'll second.
Our final order of business today is the review of 9 purchase and sales award recommendations. Presenter Ellen McCormick. Morning, Ellen.
Good morning.
We will start with contract numbers A1, 2, and A2. Any questions?
Excuse me, please introduce yourself. We have a new court report today.
Ellen McCormick, Vice President of Purchasing and Supply Chain.
Juan Pablo Prieto, Interim Senior Manager, Diversity Programs.
Any questions for A1 and A2? Okay, let's move to contracts. B1 and B2. Any questions?
Chairman? So I have a question about B1. The renovations at Grand Chicago and Division. So we're spending about $30 million. Could you just explain why when in that amount it's not going to include any elevators?
So all three, like to start by saying that all three of these stations are part of our All Stations Accessibility Program, our plan to make all rail stations accessible within the next 20 years. I don't know if President Carter has any further comments with respect to that.
No, I don't have any more comments. I think that it is certainly in the plan itself to make all of these stations accessible. The amount of work that we're doing for these three stations at this time is not capable of addressing the elevator accessibility issues, although there will be accessibility ADA type upgrades that will be made as part of the refurbishment itself. As you know, we've been working to develop a roadmap to find the funding to support the full accessibility of CTA's system on all stations. And I believe that this station is identified in the second phase of that program. So it is basically, one of the first ones that we will fund once we have additional money to do that. And that's certainly part of our plan to pursue as part of the state capital program when we get a state capital program to allow us to do that.
Thanks, and I want to commend President Carter and the team on at least at the ASAP report. It's very happy to see that out there, and I appreciate your leadership in setting out a plan and a goal for the CTA to make it accessible. So, just one other question about these stations. Can you give me a rough breakdown on what is going to be done for how much the different elements of this work is going to cost? I know there's replacement of a really old escalator and some other things.
So there's a refurbishment of the escalator at the Grand Station, which is the one station with an escalator. That is vintage 1950s. So that's a little bit more expensive. There's some electrical upgrades that are associated with that as well. So it's roughly between, I would say, $9 and $11 million on each station, depending on the station. Work will be at all three levels. At the street level, we'll be installing new canopies to protect our customers from the weather. There'll also be security cameras associated with those upgrades as well. There'll be upgrades as part of Safe and Secure to the camera systems as well. I've been told by our technology department that we'll essentially be doubling the number of cameras in these stations. We'll also be dealing with water issues at these stations, upgrades, granite flooring, new tile, paint. We'll be painting and power washing the subway tubes to make that a more pleasant experience for our customers as well.
So Carol, if you go back, you were talking about Grand Station is 1950. You said which one is 1950?
Well, they were all constructed in the 1950s, but the escalator at Grand is original to the station, so it's rather old.
I have a question. So we've broken down the DBE goals with regards to design and construction, and we're tracking that separate from the construction, right?
That's correct.
Can you talk a little bit for me, just for clarification, with regards to design and construction? What are some of the opportunities for participants in that from the DBE community?
Yes, so when we split the design goal, we identified the engineering portion for that design goal. The DBEs that were selected as part of the design goal will be performing surveying, architecture support, and street-level architecture lead. And I'll note that the goal was 30%, and the contractor came in with a 32% commitment.
Very good. And just for future reference, because I know we have other RFPs that will be coming out and we'll be looking at them as well. Are there other opportunities there that, we might?
Yeah, in addition to architecture and surveying, there may be geotechnical opportunities. mechanical, electrical, and plumbing design folks for upgrades there. So there's a variety of opportunities in the design area for DBEs.
And it looks like the response has been good.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
I should point out that one of the things that we had heard from the DB community when we started using a design build approach was that they prefer that we break out the goal for both portions of work, because what they were finding initially when we started doing this was that the contractors, the primes, were basically backloading all the DB participation onto the construction side of the work, and so the architectural and engineering firms were basically getting none of the work. Based on their feedback, we basically instituted this new policy where we set a separate goal for the design portion of the work from the goal that we set for the construction part of the work. And I can tell you the feedback I've gotten from the community has been very positive and appreciative of the fact that we're now creating these separate opportunities so that the A&E firms now feel like they have a legitimate shot at getting some of this business along with the construction firms that get the construction side of the contracts.
No, I think it's wonderful. I mean, I really commend you, because that opens up just a whole bigger door of opportunity, so that's great. That's great.
Your questions? Let's move to contracts number C1 and C2. Any questions? Next, let's move, to contract number F1.
Well, can you talk a little bit about this change order?
Sure. So the contract with Sedgwick will expire at the end of September. We will be ready to bring the new procurement before you, most likely in October or November. So this contract would expire before then.
Okay.
Additionally, if we do go with a new vendor, if we stay with the same vendor, there won't be a transition period. But if we do go with a new vendor, there would be a transition period. So this extension is to take care of that, and that's why we're asking for additional funding.
Any other questions for F1? Let's move to contract number G1 and G2. Any questions? Change orders. If there are no further questions, may I have leave to place these 9 contracts on the omnibus for approval?
So moved.
Second.
Since there is no further business to come before this committee, may I have a motion to recommend board approval of the omnibus?
So moved.
Second.
I have a second. Will the secretary call the roll, please?
Yes, it's been seconded. Excuse me. Reverend Miller.
Yes.
Ms. Irvine. Ms. Alvarez Rosales.
Yes.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
Mr. Youngblood.
Yes.
Chairman Silva.
Yes.
That motion is approved with 6 yes votes.
And finally, may I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 We're adjourned. of speakers are going to be? Terry, we're ready when you are.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Regular scheduled meeting of the Chicago Transit Board for August 15, 2018. Would the secretary call the roll?
Yes, Reverend Miller.
Here.
Mr. Irvine.
Here.
Ms. Alva Rosales.
Here.
Mr. Silva.
Here.
Mr. Youngblood.
Here.
Chairman Peterson.
Here.
We have a quorum of the board with 6 members present.
Thanks, Greg. The next order of business today is public comment. Greg?
Yes, we do. We have 5 public comment speakers, 4 who had talked to us earlier. 1 did not come, and so somebody came, and as you just allowed them to speak today. So I think I'll ask the first 3 to step up to the front. That's Mr. Quaddy Gallagher, Ms. Debbie Liu, and Ms. Julia Gerasimenko, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Thank you, Debbie. And just a reminder, consistent with board policies, please limit yourself to 3 minutes or to 3 minutes. Okay, and Mr. Gallagher, we can start with you.
Good morning. For the record, my name is pronounced Quaid, like Dennis Quaid, but he spells it wrong, so if you see him, I'm looking for him. So, like I just said, good morning, everybody. My name is Quaid Gallagher. I am the chair of Bridgeport Alliance, a grassroots organization of local residents committed to engage in the decision-making that impacts our community. The 31st Street bus is why I'm here, and it has been a campaign that has been one of our toughest and longest campaigns, going on several years now. I'm here before you to testify again on this bus, as I have done previously, but I'm also here to speak on behalf of the 466 petition signatures we've collected while canvassing the neighborhood over the last month along 31st, 2 blocks north, and along with 2 blocks south, the primary people in the neighborhood who use it, and tell you about that. By the way, 466 is near enough to put the 31st Street bus on the ballot for alderman. We have met school teachers, parents, police officers, baristas, students, bar owners, seniors, working class people, young professionals, those struggling to make ends meet. And they all have something in common. They're all concerned about the future of this bus. They all support this bus. They all would like to ride this bus. They all understand the need for this bus. However, not one of them thought that the pilot program was sufficient for what the community actually needed. For every person we talked to, not one single person thought that the pilot program was reasonable to hit the daily ridership goal it was given, and not one person thought stopping before Mercy Hospital made sense. The bus not only needs to be kept, but it needs to be expanded. Expanded to include weekend hours, to include morning rush hours, to go to Mercy Hospital and the beach and museum campus. We deserve the bus we've been fighting for, the bus we had initially proposed. And this bus is important on so many levels. It connects the local economies of McKinley Park, Bridgeport, and Bronzeville. It can provide seniors and those struggling with illness with a reasonable health care option. It can provide students and workers a safe and reliable way to get to work and school in the morning. It can start to tackle the issues of public safety by providing access to job opportunities, health care options, and public services, so people aren't put in a desperation and forced to do desperate things. The bus is a means of fighting carbon emissions as we see the ever-growing impacts of climate change, instead of people relying on Lyft and Uber, which is clogging up our streets and increasing carbon emissions in our city. I can go on and on about this bus and what issues it connects to, but I want to leave you with one final point. I grew up with public transit being my only means of escape from a pretty tough situation growing up. It was the way I first got to explore the city of Chicago as a whole. Without public transit, I would have only grown up knowing nothing more than my own block. The CTA provided me a new way to see the world and a way to access opportunities and resources I needed so I could find something new and something better. The role of the CTA, along with any government agency you can name, is to provide for the common good, no matter what it takes. Today, we have presented what is in the best interest of the public good, and we want you to act accordingly. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's fine, I'll take it in a second. Our next speaker is Ms. Debbie Liu.
Hello, Debbie Liu. I'm with the Coalition for a Better Chinese American Community. So, good morning.
Good morning.
Over the past 5 years, Bridgeport Alliance and the Coalition for a Better Chinese American Community have spoken with the community about transit issues, and 2 buses would come up regularly, the number 31, 31st Street, and number 24, Wentworth. At that time, 31 was not running at all. To this day, neither of these run on the weekends. There are 4 senior buildings managed by Chicago Housing Authority that serves predominantly Asian and African American folks at 31st and Wentworth, who feel continually snubbed by decisions by the CTA administration. I understand that Alderman Dower has written a letter to the board last month. I wanted to offer an alternative perspective. There is no east-west bus service between Cermak and 35th. That is 13 blocks, and it is the biggest east-west gap in the CTA system currently. While it may be easy to tell someone at 30th Street to take the number 35, it is pretty unreasonable for someone at 25th Street. Given the city's investment at the 31st Street corridor and nearby Halsted and Morgan Street corridors on the western part of the route, it is reasonable for transit investments to be the same. Because of the medical centers of Mercy and Advocate that seniors actually need, the route can be changed to loop north from King Drive like originally planned, so it bypasses the 31st Street historical B route. Chinese seniors have trouble taking the train because it goes underground, and there are no signs or personnel who can communicate with them in Chinese at these stations. In their home cities, from Hong Kong and Taipei, they are used to and are more comfortable on buses that they can see out the windows and recognize landmarks. Residents of all ages have expressed grievance with how 31 has run. 30 minutes interval without shelters or smartphones to know if they missed the bus or if it's running late. Monday through Friday without access to weekend activities or church. Not being able to take it to work during morning rush. Those are just a few examples. As an advocacy nonprofit, I hear you on the cost. It's not easy running on low capital, and we know that this is the right thing to do. I hope that you do too, and I strongly urge that if you build it, they will come.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Liu. Our next speaker today is Julia Gerasimenko.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Julia Gerasimenko, and I'm here representing the Active Transportation Alliance, an advocacy group working to promote biking, walking, and public transportation to make communities in Chicagoland more sustainable, equitable, and healthier. We support the 31st bus pilot becoming a permanent route. The hours of service and length of the route of the pilot make it difficult to attract riders. We know speed, reliability, and frequency are the most important factors in getting people to ride transit, and asking people to wait 30 minutes between buses makes it likely people will choose other options. CTA should consider connecting the route to Mercy Hospital and the lakefront, both incredibly important amenities that serve the communities along the corridor mentioned by Quaid and Debbie. We know that access to popular destinations is key to ridership growth, and that is what the 31st bus pilot needs to succeed, along with fast and reliable service. We need to look at quality public transportation as a public good that connects people to opportunity. So we are calling upon the CTA to address transportation equity as a citywide issue. We recognize funding for public transit in the Chicago region continues to be cut on the state level, and those cuts force CTA to make difficult choices about reducing service or increasing fares. We continue to advocate for more transit capital and operations in Springfield, as well as at the local, county, and federal levels. As part of a larger campaign to help get Chicagoans back on the bus, Active Trans calls on CTA, CDOT, and elected officials to work together to improve the speed and reliability of service, which we know is key to gaining riders and consistent revenue. People who rely on the bus should be able to expect a safe, accessible, and timely trip. We know the recipe to faster and more reliable service, and that is dedicated bus-only lanes, faster boarding, and giving buses the priority at traffic lights. We will soon be publishing ward-level bus service report cards this fall that analyzes speed and reliability of bus service by each ward, which we hope will encourage constituents to speak with their representatives to advocate for adequate funding for and implementation of bus lanes, faster boarding, transit signal priority, as the members of the Chinatown and Bridgeport communities have already been doing for the past 5 years. We also are working with community groups across the city to call for the same improvements in their communities, and we hope the board will also be a champion for these improvements. Our hope is that the state and city governments will prioritize funding for public transportation, and elected officials will be champions in this effort. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I would now ask if the three of you would vacate the table, as we have a couple more speakers coming up. Thank you.
Secretary, do we have any more speakers on the 31st?
Yes, we do. This gentleman right over here. So actually, if it's okay with Ms. Carter, could the other gentleman speak before you? But you can come on up, Ms. Carter, and sit at the desk up here. And Mr. Arnone? Yes, please sit down. And Ms. Carter? Yes, we have one more 31st Street speaker, so I'll let Mr. Arnone speak next. Thank you, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Ron Arnone. I'm the Vice President of Physician Alignment at Mercy Hospital and Medical Center and part of the executive team. And I'm here to give you some thoughts about why you may want to consider extending this bus route. As you all know already, the bus route starts at the Ashland Orange line. It ends at Lake Meadows Shopping Center, where there's a grocery store, pharmacy, and fitness center. Along the line, there's access to one of the Mercy Medical Group physician offices. There's also access to the red and green lines, access to Illinois College of Optometry, Illinois Institute of Technology, and also would enhance access to the parks. In June 2016, Mercy Hospital published a community health needs assessment, reporting on the demonstrated areas of need exhibited by the community. Access to care and community resources was identified as a key finding. Access to care is a complex and intricate concept that includes dimensions of proximity, availability, convenience, and accommodation. Our group concluded that the disparities in access to care and community resources are underlying root causes of many of the health inequities experienced by the residents in the community that we serve at Mercy. Inequities in access to public transportation options experienced by this community undoubtedly play a role in the larger access to care issues in our area. Armour Square, encompassing Chinatown, is served by Mercy Hospital. According to the Chicago Health Atlas, Armour Square endures high economic hardships, as 39% of the households live in poverty, which is over 10% higher than the total percentage of households living in poverty in Chicago. Lacking the option of public transportation to travel to Mercy via the 31st Street bus route, access to care becomes a prominent issue faced by the residents of Armour Square. Cancer treatment is a prime example of an important service provided by Mercy to the residents of Armour Square and the Chinese community. In its commitment to providing the support its patients need, Mercy has developed a cancer navigation program which assigns a professional to every cancer patient to help guide the patients through cancer diagnosis and treatment process. Additionally, since 2014, Mercy has partnered with the Chinese American Service League to increase Chinese-speaking patients' access to program resources. This partnership demonstrates the reliance of many Chinese-speaking patients, many of whom reside in Armour Square, on the unique and vital services provided by Mercy. So we humbly ask that you consider this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman, before
Yes, go ahead, Kevin.
President Carter, I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about the 31st Street bus and the pilot program, and if there's anything that the staff can do to address this need and the community's needs in the future.
Well, first of all, let me preface this by I certainly understand the community's needs, and I certainly understand the hospital's needs. I'm very familiar with this area of the city and understand the challenges that they're facing. That is one of the reasons why I authorized this pilot in the very beginning, to try to create some level of access that would allow us to meet the needs of this community. I know that we have been working closely with the community to try to identify ways to support the service that we're providing, to market the service that we're providing, and to provide the resources necessary to make it work. What we have seen in terms of the ridership on this particular route has been extremely below what the projection was needed to support the service that we're providing. I have asked and continue to seek the possibility of subsidies to support the service that could then allow us to continue to provide this service that the community is asking for. But so far, we have not been successful in identifying any support, financial support for it. I've heard from IIT. I'm hearing from Mercy Hospital, institutions that are in this community, and both of whom have expressed the importance of the accessibility of our service to their constituents. Unfortunately, it takes more than an expression of support to fund the services that we're providing here. I continue to try to identify innovative ways to support this. You've heard the conversations that we've had about our budget and our fiscal situation that have continued to make that even more of a challenge for us. My desire to provide additional service or extra service in that corridor is really dependent on the ability to get ridership to support the service that I already have. It is a formula that we use throughout the CTA. It's not just something that I'm applying in this particular part of the city. And I think that at the end of the day, our options are very limited in terms of what we can do to continue this service. I don't doubt, and I certainly have heard from the community on a regular basis about how important the service is to them and how much they'd like to see it not just continue, but to increase. But I need to find the financial support to make that happen. And right now, I have not been able to do that.
Yeah. And if I could add, I think it was July the 20th, we spent about over an hour. Dorval and I actually went out to meet with the state rep. So we met with the state rep, well, I think it was July 23rd.
Yes.
And talked about, one, our commitment to the route, but again, expressing the need to get support to fund the route. And she mentioned, I think, at that meeting that she would talk with at least one, if not both, of the institutions Dorval mentioned. We sent information about the support that we get from the University of Chicago in terms of helping us subsidize that particular route, and was hoping, again, that we could get that kind of support. I know that we've both reached out to Alderman Patrick Thompson in the 11th Ward. We've reached out to Alderman Pat Dowell, again, trying to find ways to come up with funding to continue the service. So I just wanted to also add that both of us have been meeting or talking with elected officials trying to get support for funding to continue this route as well.
And I should point out, we'll continue to do that. I'm not giving up on the route. I'm not giving up on the community. I will continue to work with the community and with the institutions in the community to see if we can find a way to make this work.
Understood. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Arnone. And our last speaker today, excuse me, will be Ms. Ethel Carter.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Ethel William Carter, and I am a pensioner from the great CTA and a senior citizen. And so on Monday, July 16, 2018, I was on bus 1233, about 10:20. And there was a lady that boarded the bus. She was already there, and she was irate with the operator. And I'm here to tell you that operator was as professional, more professional than I would have been back in my day. So when I got on the bus, I said to the lady, to the bus operator, I found out her name was Miss Washington. I said, girl, ignore these people. I said, you know, we got all kind of idiots in the world. Just keep on moving us. Bad move for me. The lady, she lit into me. She called me all kinds of names. But that wasn't the sad part. The sad part was she moved 3 times, stood over me, and threatened to beat my old senior citizen A. Fight or flight kicked in for me. Because, see, I've been assaulted 12 times on my good job here. But I stayed. I'm a weeping willow tree. I stayed and I got my pension. So I looked at the lady and I said, just do it. Just beat me down. And the operator, she hit and the police came. Police didn't arrest her. But the sad part was this woman sat there and bragged about her $200 in her pocket And this was a scam that she do all the time. She get up on the bus, she get her operators a hard time, she don't pay the fare, she disrupt the service. So I'm sitting here today because I ain't got nothing but free time. And I got to thinking, I'm looking around at all the great advertisements y'all have on the bus. It's awesome. But I didn't see none in big bold letters that would say CTA action for change and betterment. I was able to get this rule of conduct. Excellent. But if we could, we should put it on posters. School is about to start back. So when the people and the kids get on the bus, they know that riding the CTA is a privilege and a right. And we have rules that you must conform to. One, you get on that bus, you are required to pay a fare. Under the rules of conduct, that's trespassing. Two, it's in small letters. Anytime you assault an employee or a passenger, we're not going to play with you. We're going to take you and we're going to see if we can get you some public service time. Clean up around the trains and the bus stations. Because I've had the pleasure, guys, since I've been retired, of traveling all over the world. Internationally, Paris, London, Barcelona. Barcelona, the people ride on Mercedes buses. You talking about pride and respect for the operators? Those people get up there and they're so proud to have the privilege. Listen to 31st Street trying to get a bus. Listen to those people. This is a privilege and a right. So I sit here today and I ask, all the empty spaces you got up there, let's take 3 of the top rules of conduct. Let's educate our young people getting ready to come back to school. Let's educate the old people, because we have 2 types of riders at the CTA. We got the informed who want to go someplace and about something, and then we got the ignorant that just want to be there and cause havoc. And your frontline employees don't deserve that.
Ms. Carter,
You
we need
should
to
see
wrap
the
up pretty. We
professionalism.
need to wrap up pretty soon, Ms. Carter.
I'm finishing it up. I'm just saying, board, thank you for listening. I had the pleasure of serving with Mr. Carter on the pension board and Mr. Cruzy, and we always talked about how we got things done. Let's get this done. Let's remember that riding the CTA is a privilege and a right. It's people moving people with pride and integrity. I thank y'all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carter.
Doval, I like that idea.
So let me, I feel I must respond to my namesake, even though we are not related. I many times viewed her as a relation. Ms. Carter is 100% correct, both in terms of the behavior of our customers, some of our customers, that is not in accordance with our code of conduct and our expectations, but also in terms of the professionalism of our bus operators. The abuse that they take on a daily basis is not something anyone should have to put up with. And they do it in a professional manner. They remain courteous. They continue to provide the services that are vital to the city in spite of all of that. There is a campaign that we are going to be starting in the next few weeks that are intended to really focus on the professionalism of our bus and rail operators. It is a campaign that is going to really make the point that these are human beings. These are people who have families and lives and are professional and need to be thought of that way. But in addition to that, we do and we have been continuing to put up advertisements around our code of conduct. There have been campaigns that we have run around the behavior of our customers and courtesy that they're supposed to show. I will make sure, I do like the idea of making sure that we're getting to the schools and to other places information about the code of conduct, and we will take on that assignment as one of the follow-ups from this conversation that I think can help further amplify how you are supposed to behave when you're on a CTA bus. I will tell you that when a bus operator is assaulted, we do take that very seriously. We pursue felony upgrades, so the question of whether or not someone will spend time in jail for doing that. It's something that we want to make happen. We do not tolerate at any level that type of activity, and we do very much want to make sure that our employees are treated in a professional manner. So we're going to continue to work on it. It is an ongoing problem at CTA. It's a problem in society that we all experience in different forms and fashion. But we're committed to making sure that we can do all that we can to both inform our customers and also protect our employees.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Sounds like we might want to share the rules of conduct, just as a reminder to the police department as well.
We do. We meet regularly with CPD to remind them of our expectation that they enforce the code of conduct. We have the ability to issue fines and other things under our ordinance to people who violate the code of conduct, and certainly, particularly the mass transit police, are very much aware of what those expectations are, and our expectation that they'll enforce them.
Yes, and just before we close out public comment, just for the record, Mr. Gallagher brought 466 signatures in support of the 31st Street bus. And I received correspondence this morning from Andrew Mack on the 31st Street bus and from David Dalka regarding the RPM project in Lakeview. And all of the board members will have copies of that correspondence on your desk when you go back today. And that concludes the public comment section, Chairman.
All right, thanks, Greg. The next order of business today is the approval of the regular board meeting minutes of July 2011, 2018. Regular board meeting. The minutes were previously distributed. Any comments? Hearing none, I'll now entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the regular board meeting of July 11th, 2018.
So moved.
Second.
Seconded by Reverend Miller. Reverend Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Irvine, Ms. Alva Rosales,
Yes.
Mr. Silva,
Abstain.
Mr. Youngblood,
Approved.
Chairman Peterson.
Yes.
Minutes are approved with 5 yes votes and 1 abstention.
Thanks, Greg. We will now take up executive session matters. It is my understanding that there will be executive session this morning, Brad.
Yes, Chairman Peterson, we will have an executive session pursuant to Section 2, Paragraph C, subparagraphs 5 and 11 of the Illinois Open Meetings Act.
Thanks, Brad. I will now entertain a motion to recess into executive session based upon council recommendation.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded, Reverend Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Irvine, Ms. Alva Rosales,
Yes.
Mr. Silva,
Yes.
Mr. Youngblood,
Yes.
Chairman Peterson.
Yes.
Motion is approved with 6 yes votes. Whatever, she loves Bewitched. Would everybody please turn off their cell phones? And we're going to close the door. Let the people leave who are leaving. Thank you for coming. And I think then you can probably start up, Chairman, whenever you wish.
All set? Okay. I would now entertain a motion to return to open session.
So move.
Second.
Second, Reverend Miller.
Yes.
Ms. Irvine.
Yes.
Ms. Alvarez-Rosales.
Yes.
Mr. Silva.
Yes.
Mr. Youngblood.
Yes.
Chairman Peterson.
Yes.
That motion is approved with 6 yes votes.
Thanks, Greg. I would now like to address board item 4A and 4B, the executive session items. Brad?
Thank you, Chairman Peterson. Item in 4A is a recommendation by staff that the board approve the acquisition of 2 parcels which are located at 9528 and 9530 South Lafayette Avenue in Chicago to support transit operations at the new 95th Street Terminal and a CTA substation located immediately south of the 2 properties. Staff recommends purchase of the property located at 9528 South Lafayette, which contains a single-family home in an amount of $108,000 plus a relocation payment up to $32,000 to the seller Erica Bland Durasimi. In addition, staff recommends purchase of the adjoining parcel located at 9530 South Lafayette, which is a vacant lot, for an amount of $29,000 to seller Kamari Riggs. Agenda item 4B is a staff recommendation that the board approve the CTA's acquisition at a cost of $425,000 of a permanent rights air easement over property located at 4849 to 4887 North Broadway Avenue and 1123 West Ainsley Street in Chicago, which were previously authorized for acquisition by the board as Parcel 20 for the red and purple modernization project. The Parcel 20 easement is approximately 2,167 square feet of air rights over the rear portion of the property. The parcel is owned by American Asia Incorporated, an Illinois corporation.
All right, thanks, Brad. I now entertain a motion to approve 2 ordinances. An ordinance authorizing the acquisition of properties located at 9528 and 9530 South Lafayette Avenue, Chicago, Illinois, red line, and an ordinance authorizing the acquisition of permanent air right easements over property located at 4849, 4887 North Broadway Avenue, and 1123 West Ainsley Street, Chicago, Illinois, for the red purple modernization project.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded by Reverend Miller.
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Irvine? Ms. Alvarez-Rosales?
Yes.
Mr. Silva?
Yes.
Mr. Youngblood?
Yes.
Chairman Peterson?
Yes.
That motion is approved on 4A and 4B with 6 yes votes.
Thanks, Greg. The next order of business is the review of 2 settlements. Board item number 4C and 4D. Brad?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. It's agenda item 4C, and that's the Law Department's recommendation to settle the lawsuit captioned Geraldo and Margarita Contreras versus Chicago Transit Authority and Jose Manning, case number 15L007542, pending in the Circuit Court of Cook County, Illinois, for the amount of $1,550,000. The lawsuit involved an accident with a bus that occurred on July 25, 2014 on Archer Avenue as the operator, Mr. Jose Manning, was turning left from the Orange Line Midway Terminal and in doing so made contact with the Contreras vehicle, which was proceeding westbound on Archer Avenue with the right-of-way.
All right, thank you, Brad. I'll now entertain a motion to approve agenda item 4C, Geraldo and Margarita Contreras versus Chicago Transit Authority and Jose Manning, Circuit Court of Illinois, number 2015L007542 for $1,550,000.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded for 4C. Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Ms. Irvine? Ms. Alvarez-Rosales?
Yes.
Mr. Silva?
Yes.
Mr. Youngblood?
Yes.
Chairman Peterson?
Yes.
The motion to approve item 4C is approved with 6 yes votes.
The next order of business is a report from the Committee on Finance, Audit, and Budget. Director Silva.
The Committee on Finance, Audit, and Budget met earlier this morning The committee approved the July minutes and reviewed the finance report. The committee also reviewed two ordinances. An ordinance authorizing entry into a permanent easement agreement with the City of Chicago, granting the authority an easement on certain property located at 1311-15 North Moomon Street, Chicago, Illinois, Blue Line. An ordinance authorizing a sublease to DJM Logistics LLC of a portion of property located at 120 North Racine Avenue, Chicago, Illinois. The committee also reviewed 9 purchases and sales award recommendations. The committee approved all these items, recommended board approval for all items, and placed all the items on the omnibus for approval. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Director Silva. May I now have a motion to approve the omnibus as stated by Director Silva?
So moved.
And seconded. Reverend Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Irvine, Ms. Alva Rosales,
Yes.
Mr. Silva,
Yeah.
Mr. Youngblood.
Yes.
Chairman Peterson.
Yes.
That motion is approved with 6 yes votes.
Thanks, Greg. The next order of business is a construction report. Carol.
Carol Maury, Chief Infrastructure Officer, and I'm here with Bill Mooney, Vice President of Power and Way, and JP Prieto, our Director of Diversity. So Bill will present the infrastructure projects first, and then I'll present the facilities projects.
Good morning.
Good
Morning.
The first project I'm looking to provide an update on today is our East Lake, Milwaukee, Illinois substation upgrade, which is providing for the upgrade to 3 of our traction power substations. The project remains on budget and on schedule. Recent activity has started to shift away from a lot more of the building envelope work and interior work that we've been discussing recently at Milwaukee and Illinois, and we're starting to receive delivery of traction power equipment itself and preparing for the installation of that equipment in those substations. We continue building envelope work at East Lake. Here's an example of, these are for ComEd service disconnect boxes for our new ComEd service at Milwaukee substation. This is actually an improvement over the historic design where we remove this to the exterior of the building, which allows us more flexibility in maintaining those facilities as well as for ComEd in servicing us. The next picture gives you an example of the masonry work at Illinois substation, which is the building on the left. The building on the right is the same vintage and same appearance of what Illinois looked like before we began the restoration, so it gives you a good sense of what that improvement did to that facility. The next project I'm providing an update on is the Ravenswood Loop Signal Upgrade Project, which is upgrading our signal control system between Armitage Station and the Loop. The project remains on budget and tight to schedule. The recent activity is we've begun installing the relay houses, most notably Cleveland Relay House, which is where all the field equipment communicate back to the major processors that allow for that safe train movement and protection of our trains through these corridors, as well as cable connections to that field equipment. And in this circumstance, they're doing some integrity testing of the cable within the Cleveland Relay House to that field equipment, making sure that it works as it's designed.
So the next project is the 95th Terminal Improvement Project. This project remains tight to schedule and budget. Demolition of the north terminal is complete and steel erection has begun, and the work is proceeding as expected. So if you turn to the pictures, the first one shows the concrete pour on the north terminal atrium. This will be where the pedestrian bridge will connect the 2 terminals over 95th Street. And then on the second page, you can see the pulling cable for the interlocking south of the station. So in addition to the terminal improvements, we'll also have improvements for train movements in and out of the yard and into the pockets as part of this project. So the next project is our Quincy Station. This is an accessibility project. As we've reported before, the contractor continues to struggle slightly with the schedule, although we still expect that they'll complete the project before the end of 2018. And you can see the progress that we've made in the past month in the pictures. So first you see the work in closing the elevator with the glass panels. And then on the second picture, you can see the build out of the new bridge, which will connect the elevator with the station platform. The next project is the Illinois Medical District project. This project is nearing completion and is expected to be open by the end of this month. If you turn to the pictures, you see the new facade of the Ogden Station House with the IMD and CTA logos. And then the second picture, you can see the interior of the Paulina Station House. So you can see how close to completion it is. And these pictures are a couple weeks old. And then the final project is the Garfield Green Station renovation. Work continues on the temporary entrance on the east side of the station, which will be utilized during the closure for the full renovation of the station house. So we'll keep that station open. Work is also proceeding on the exterior restoration of the historic station house. So if you turn to the first picture here, you can see this brickwork on the historic station house that's been really hidden up till now. You can see it's quite elaborate. This again was built for the 1893 Columbian Exposition. It's the oldest station house in our system, one of the oldest in the country actually. And so part of this project will restore that to its former glory.
Mr. Chairman, this picture in particular shocked me because for all the years that I have been going past that station house, I had no idea that this brickwork existed until they started restoring it. And it really does sort of make the point of how historic this particular station house is and how beautiful it was in its original condition, which is what we're going to be restoring it to.
I can't wait. I mean, this is where I grew up. When I came to Chicago in '71, I stayed at 225 East 55th Place, and I went to Diet Middle School and then 5327. So for years, I used this station, and as you mentioned, I'm talking about the 70s and 80s. I had no idea that it looked like that. So this is really one that I'm hoping to see once it's completed. This is incredible.
Yeah, I mean, it's already starting to look better as we've stripped out off the paint. Even the front, the wood is in much better condition than we would have expected as well. So it's proceeding very well. And then the second picture just shows you the preparations for the temporary entrance, so we can keep the station open during the work. And that concludes my report.
Any questions for Carol, Bill, or Juan Pablo? Any questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Greg, is there any new business to come before the board?
No new business, sir.
No further business to come before the board. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
We adjourn. Thank you.